As you know that you work one with the Father, there is no limitation, no boundaries. You know it is your divine right to accomplish all things. Then follow me only as I follow the Christ, the true Son, the only begotten of the Father. And as I bring forth and present God, I do bring forth God from within. Then will it be said, all are God. The greatest sermon ever given is, Behold God. This means seeing God standing forth in all glory, right within and from you, and from all others also. When you behold God and nothing else but God, you love and worship God, and God alone. You truly behold God. You are the Lord, the lawgiver, the dispenser of the law. When you pray, enter your closet, the secret chamber of your own soul. There, pray to your Father within, and your Father who hears does reward you openly. Pray and give thanks that you are able to give forth more of God to the whole world. Does this not give you a higher and more lofty outlook, a broader perspective, a nobler ideal? Here the talk ended. We all arose from the table, and our friends bade us good night and departed. We stayed on for a time and talked over the experiences, then decided to return to our lodging in the village. As we arose, the thought immediately presented itself. How are we to proceed without a light? And all except the chief voiced this thought. Then he said, You can see how definitely habit fixes itself upon us, and how desperately we cling to old ideas. Here we are, completely immersed in light. It has not dimmed because of the absence of those we have grown to love so dearly. Is this not an occasion where we can step forth and show our own self-reliance, our own ability to be and to accomplish the things that we have experienced? Let us at least extend this to ourselves and have the courage to take the step toward the accomplishment. We are leaning so hard upon our wonderful friends that it actually hurts to have them leave us for a moment. I can see, as they already know, that if we do not become self-reliant in these small things, we will never accomplish the larger things, and I do not doubt for an instant that they have left in order to give us the opportunity of proving the accomplishment. Let us rise to the emergency and be above it. As we started, one of the party suggested that we meditate on the method of procedure, but the chief in a firm voice said, No, if we go now. After what we have seen and experienced, we must act, and make these acts definite, or we do not deserve any consideration. Whereupon we proceeded down the stairs, through the different rooms, through the tunnel, and down the ladder to the village. As we walked along, our way was completely lighted, our bodies seemed without weight, and we moved with the utmost ease. We arrived at our lodging overjoyed by the accomplishment. From that time on until we left the village, we traveled where we pleased, without artificial light. Our lodging lighted up as we entered the rooms, and the warmth and beauty surpassed any power of description. We retired almost immediately. Needless to say, we did not awaken till late the next morning. Next chapter. The next morning we had our breakfast at the lodge, then were directed to the upper room of the temple. There was no visible concept of the confines of a room, nor any evidence of limitation, and so we moved freely with no thought of exertion. When we were ready to go below to the room of the records, we were there. As we had accomplished this without the presence of our friends, we realized the reason for their withdrawal and were very much elated over our attainment. The 1st of April was fast approaching. We had finished the records in the temple rooms and had taken up the work of making measured drawings of the numerous characters and many carvings cut in the rocks outside. This work was going along very nicely because of our all-absorbing interest. One afternoon a messenger came to the village, and as the villagers gathered around him, we saw that something unusual was happening. We dropped our work and proceeded to the village. We met our hostess and were informed, the messenger that brought the information, that a party of bandits was at large in the valley below. This caused considerable uneasiness among the inhabitants, as this village had been the focal point of attempted raids for many years. The report had gone far and wide that the tall cross temple was a hiding place for a vast treasure. The many attempts to rob the village had failed. The bands had in a great measure attributed former failures to the resistance of the people who lived in the valley below. A number of the bands had now concentrated their combined forces, and a band of about 4,000 well-mounted and armed men were preying upon and devastating the valley in order to discourage the resistance of the inhabitants in closer proximity to the little village of the Tall Cross. They hoped by this method that the raid would be more successful. The messenger also appealed for protection for the remaining inhabitants, as a great many had already been destroyed, and they had reached the limit of their resistance. He was told that there was no one in the village who would be sent, but our hostess assured him that he could return to his home and that no harm would come to his people. We went on with our work, noting the uneasiness of the villagers, and that uneasiness was communicated to us. The next morning we again resumed our work, as we were very anxious to complete the references for our records. We were certain they would give a complete and accurate history, and also references as to where other records could be found. Thus we could trace the history of this older and extremely enlightened civilization that occupied this vast and now most remote portion of the world. We were disturbed by the possibility of losing this collection by reason of the bandit raids. As the result of our work, this collection was all assembled in the rooms of the records, where they had hitherto withstood a number of similar raids from the same source. That evening we talked to our hostess about the possibility of the formulation of some plan to aid the villagers, and voiced our surprise and wonder at the absence of our friends. We were told that, as an appeal for aid had been made by the messenger, the bandits would be obliged to stop their raids or they would destroy themselves. We retired that evening fully assured that we had been over-solicitous of our own safety. We arose early and were preparing to resume work, when the same messenger appeared with the news that the raids had ceased upon the inhabitants and that the band had concentrated their entire force about 20 miles down the valley for an apparent concerted last drive on our little village. As our hostess and little party stood talking to the messenger, who was surrounded by a group of the villagers, a horseman rode into the village and came toward us. In coming toward us, as he passed smaller groups of congregated people, he was apparently recognized. They immediately dispersed and fled in terror. As he neared our group, the messenger called out the horseman's name, and then the messenger as well as the others took refuge in flight, evidently fearing that the horseman was being followed by the band. Our hostess and ourselves were the only ones left as we awaited the nearer approach of the horseman. He reined in his horse and with much gusto addressing our chief began to speak, saying that the bandits were fully aware we were strangers and they were acquainted with our mission. He spoke in a tongue that none of us understood. He saw our bewilderment and asked if there were not someone that could interpret. Our hostess turned and faced the man as he sat upon his horse and asked if she could be of service. At first he looked as though he had received a severe electric shock. He, however, sufficiently recovered his composure to fairly spring from his horse. He rushed toward her with outstretched hands, exclaiming, "You here?" in the language that we understood. Then he placed his hands to his forehead and prostrated himself before her, begging her pardon. Our hostess directed him to arise and deliver his message. We could see her form stiffen, and for a moment her features almost blazed with anger. So intense was her display of emotion that for an instant we, as well as the man himself, were absolutely startled out of our composure. The words, "Coward, murderer, step forth and deliver your message," almost leapt from her lips. The man again went to his knees. Again the words blazed forth. "Stand up! Are you so debased that you dare not stand?" We did not wonder at the man's abject terror, for we, as well as he, were absolutely rooted to the spot, unable to move. I am certain, had it been humanly possible for the man to have done so, he would have fled from the scene. For the moment he, as well as ourselves, had lost all power of speech and action. He crumpled to the ground, limp and apparently lifeless.